Good. Welcome everyone to our third workshop of the CCAC M-RAP NDC Enhancement webinar season. This season is going to be focused on oil and gas methane, and today we are very happy to have with us two guest speakers, Mr. James Diamond and Mr. Balabapa, who are going to tell us about their respective countries' experience. I'm going to be sharing my screen now. The Methane Roadmap Action Program was launched in response to the Global Methane Pledge. The Global Methane Pledge now has 157 country participants, plus the EU, who pledged to collectively reduce methane by 30% by 2030. Under the GMP, countries are encouraged to develop their methane roadmap action plans. The M-RAP primary objective is to support development and implementation of transparent and consistent national methane roadmaps action plan. Over the past 2 years, we engaged with over 75 countries on methane roadmap development and action plans through workshops and technical assistance. All GMP ODA eligible countries can receive CCAC support to develop their methane roadmaps. This year, most of you are working on the development of your new NDCs. All elements involved in the development of a roadmap can also be used to include or enhance inclusion of methane in NDC development. Hence, under the M-RAP program, we have designed this dedicated webinar series to provide countries with concrete and practical guidance for how to leverage the M-RAP methodology, tools, and resources of the CCAC to include and enhance inclusion of methane into their NDCs. Many countries have included methane in their NDCs in some form, but there's a lack of specifically measures or certain targets. So improving inclusion of methane in NDCs is of major importance. Consistent and harmonized inclusion of methane into BTRs will also be critical for transparency and the tracking of progress under the GMP. It is also a unique opportunity to confirm that we are on track to deliver on the GMP. Moreover, stepping up ambition and transparency is essential for unlocking finance for methane mitigation. Thirdly, it is an opportunity to bring into NDCs an integrated approach to climate and air quality, which has multiple advantages, as well as explained during this series. Most importantly, the 2025-2035 timeline covered by the NDC 3.0 represents the last 1.5 consistent window to leverage the near-term climate mitigation benefits that methane abatement can bring while we are transitioning towards net zero economies. So time for improved, more ambitious, transparent, and consistent inclusion of methane abatement measures and targets into NDCs is really now. On the agenda today, before we go and tell you more about the agenda today, we are at the CCAC stand ready for support. We are also supporting your efforts through our comprehensive assistance system and the Secretariat services we provide to the Global Methane Pledge participants. Regarding our agenda today, we are going to be hearing from Nathan Borgfred-Parnell from the CCAC Secretariat, who's going to tell us more about the NDC enhancement guidelines for oil and gas sector. We also have Mr. James Diamond, Manager of the Oil, Gas and Alternative Energy Division of the ECCC, to tell us more about Canada's experience. Then we will have Mr. Balabapa from Nigeria, who is going to tell us about Nigeria's experience. Then we will have 20 minutes of questions and answers, and then Nathan will be closing the session. Without further ado, I would like to turn to Nathan from the CCAC to tell us more about the NDC enhancements guidelines for oil and gas sector.
Thank you very much, Jarir, and thanks to everyone who has joined us today for this this Methane Roadmap Action Program workshop focused on the oil and gas sector. My name is Nathan Borgford Parnell. I lead the Science Affairs program at the CCAC, which includes co-leading the M-RAP program. Let's begin. Before I talk a little bit about the guidance and then hand over to our national experts to provide some good practice examples of what they've done in their home countries on this topic. I'd like to point out one that we have quite a bit. We've developed quite a few resources and guidance documents and tools that are available to countries, well, to anyone really involved in the NDC enhancement process or methane management and planning in countries. They are available on our website through our methane portal, and they include templates and guidance documents, recordings of previous M-RAP workshop series events, to help countries work through the process of really understanding what their existing level of data and knowledge and commitments are around methane, articulate methane mitigation, I should say, and then articulate that information into what we're calling a methane roadmap. As Jareer mentioned, those roadmaps, which are the focus of the M-RAP program, are designed in a way to be fully supportive and synergized with the existing processes for NDCs and other reporting and data processes under the enhanced transparency framework of the Paris Agreement. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a second. We provide as well other resources, both financial support in terms of technical assistance, for countries that are interested in filling data gaps or information or knowledge gaps, or any other planning support or policy regulatory support that they may need. And we do that through our technical assistance program, which right now provides up to $50,000 per project request from a country, and that money is available to all GMP partner countries that are development assistance, who can receive development assistance. And we are specifically mobilizing those resources this year to support the NDC enhancement process. So if you are a government representative, or if you know representatives from partner countries or GMP members who would be interested in receiving those resources and support for NDC enhancement around methane in particular, but for SLCPs in general, please do reach out to us. We are here to assist you. Next slide. Actually, yeah, I already covered this slide. I should say one thing that I did not cover in that previous slide was that we, in addition to the technical assistance we provide, we have 7 sectoral hubs in the CCAC where our broader partnership comes together. That means their countries, non-governmental organizations, industry representatives, and intergovernmental organizations come together and develop projects and imagine new and future opportunities in all of the sectors that we work on in the CCAC. The sectors that are most relevant for methane are agriculture, waste, and fossil fuels, and we have a hub for each of those. And so I encourage any of you who are part of the CCAC partnership and are interested in being part of that broader community of practice to, again, reach out, and we will be happy to connect you with the coordinators for those hubs. Sorry, thank you, Jareer. Please go forward to that other slide. So I'm going to very quickly give an overview of the guidance that we are developing, the step-by-step guidance with good practice examples that we are developing to help countries, consultants, and other experts who are involved right now directly with the NDC 3.0 enhancement process. For those of you who are not aware, next year is when all country parties to the Paris Agreement are expected to submit their new updated NDCs, titled NDC 3.0. Technically speaking, the countries have agreed to submit their NDCs 8 months prior to the Conference of the Parties, which happens in November, which means that the the deadline would be February of next year. I think it's very unlikely many countries are actually going to meet that deadline, but that is the deadline that we should be aiming for. And please, next slide. And within that frame, there are a number of other things that are expected in terms of the 3.0 NDC. One, the current NDCs as they exist include nationally determined and mitigation commitments that are set to an end year of 2030. For the most part, this new NDC 3.0, will move the mitigation targets forward to 2035. And the expectation is that in addition to establishing a new target 5 years further into the future, that this new target will hopefully be 1.5 consistent in terms of its levels of ambition. And obviously the total mitigation potentials and percentages for each individual country will vary based on national capacities and emissions and technological capabilities, but the expectation is that within the aggregate they will add up to a level of ambition that's consistent with achieving a 1.5 pathway. They also need to be more ambitious than in terms of total quantified mitigation as compared to the previous NDC. Finally, the expectation is that while many countries have already moved to a mitigation commitment that covers the entire Kyoto basket of greenhouse gases and all economic sectors within their national borders, many countries also have not, and the expectation is in this new NDC that all, if most, if not all countries will now have moved to a mitigation target that includes all Kyoto basket gases and covers all economic sectors. Next slide, please. So where do we stand now when it comes to methane inclusion in the NDCs? As I said, if you look at the bottom left column down there, the dark blue, that shows how many NDCs within their overall target are including methane, and you'll see that we are well over 90% of current submitted NDCs include methane within the economy-wide target. That's fantastic. We could get to 100, I think, quite easily, and that should be our ambition. But below that, in terms of transparently communicating either the levels of ambition or activities that will occur at a sectoral or subsectoral level, or all the way down to an activity level, which then add up to that economy-wide target. Many fewer NDCs include that level of information and transparency. And the move in terms of the broader guidance under the Katowice climate package is to begin providing that greater level of transparency and clarity, which is critically important, not just because it was agreed on within the negotiations, but this new round of NDCs is being looked at by particularly finance institutions, intergovernmental financing institutions like the World Bank and the other multilateral development banks as the guideposts for resource mobilization and indications that there is strong political will necessary for them to be able to support additional resource mobilization. So it is really quite critical that countries, when they're considering developing and expanding on their NDCs from their current versions into this NDC 3.0, really think hard about providing as much transparent information as possible, not just at that economy-wide level, but down into the sectors and subsectors and at an activity level, so that those can be more easily translated into project financing, not just from the public sector or from the multilateral development banks, but also private sector financing. So you'll see here, we are today talking about the fossil fuel sector, particularly oil and gas, and slightly less than 20% of current NDCs include that greater level of transparency when it comes to additional targets or specifically enumerated activities within the fossil fuel sector. So there's a lot of room for improvement there, and that's why one of the reasons why we're focusing on it today. Next slide. So Jareer mentioned this in his intro, but very quickly, within the Methane Roadmap Action Program, we have established a methodology built on, or based on a series of building blocks, 5 building blocks, which will be unique and specific to each country, but should all be included one way or another in a methane roadmap. Those building blocks were designed in a way that they would be synergistic with existing commitments in both the NDC process, but also the Enhanced Transparency Framework, which is the MRV component of the Paris Agreement. And the most and one of the elements of that are the biennial transparency reports, where countries are expected to report create and report on a higher level of resolution in their emissions inventories, and then of course reporting on progress towards the previous commitment. So building blocks 1 on inventories and 5 on MRV are most relevant from our template for the BTRs. The first round of those are expected to be submitted to the UNFCCC by all countries on the 31st of this December. And then building blocks 2, 3, and 4, which are analytics, and then target setting and identifying policies and measures to support implementation of the measures that lead up to the targets. Those are most relevant to the NDC process as we go forward. Next slide. So in terms of the economy-wide target, this is the thing that all countries have agreed to establish as a frontline element of the mitigation element of the NDC. And as I've already stated, the guidance on that is that every country now start including all Kyoto basket gases in the economy-wide target, that the economy-wide target be a single target based on carbon dioxide equivalent calculation, typically using global warming potential at 100 years, but that is not a requirement. That the target include a base year, the target year, in this case being 2035, and a quantified reduction target based on those factors, and should include all economic sectors. So in the case of methane, right, we want to make sure that we are supporting all of you so that methane specifically is included in the economy-wide target, but that all others are included as well, as it's critical to achieving the 1.5 target. And then, of course, within all of the economic sectors, the ones that are most important for methane are agriculture, waste, and fossil fuels. Beyond that general but very specific requirement in the economy-wide targets, we do advocate that countries consider providing slightly more information about what goes into the economy-wide target for transparency purposes. And there are a number of examples of countries that have done this, and one example is Japan. In their current target, their current NDC, they have a table which enumerates in carbon dioxide equivalents the amount of methane, nitrous oxide, HFCs, PFCs, and FF6 will be reduced within that economy-wide target, and how much will be reduced within each sector. So none of that is additional target setting. It's all just being more transparent about what goes into that economy-wide target. But that is one of the ways that we are really advocating in the CCAC that countries consider providing a little bit more transparent information that we can use to mobilize resources in particular to support implementation. Next slide. So I did mention this. So the Katowice guidance, the Katowice climate package was negotiated and agreed by the countries in the Katowice COP to provide additional guidance on what should go into the NDCs. I've already gone through what the Katowice guidance says about the economy-wide target, but there are there's quite a bit of additional information that has been negotiated and is expected from countries to communicate. And that includes, for example, an analysis of co-benefits beyond what I've already discussed, national context, and then assumptions for example, the methodology that was used to include or to reach a carbon dioxide equivalent basis for the target. We provide guidance on all of these points in the guidance document that we're going to be publishing in the first draft version next week. And we will share that with all of you once that is available. Please, next slide. So in the case of fossil fuels, and this is my last couple of slides because I know we want to get to the country examples as quickly as possible. Fossil fuel methane is really quite critical in terms of establishing 1.5 consistent levels of mitigation targets within this particular round of NDCs. And that's not just because the fossil fuel sector is responsible for over a third of anthropogenic methane emissions, but when we did the analysis in the CCAC of where are the available technologies and mitigation opportunities for all of methane across all three main sectors in the near term, what we were able to determine was that fully 50% of the, let's say, gettable methane mitigation in this next decade is in the fossil fuel sector. It is really critical that this sector deliver in the near term substantial methane mitigation to stay consistent with 1.5 levels of ambition and the commitment made in the global methane pledge. And that's not to say that in the agricultural sector or in the waste sectors that they are not important as well. Maximal efforts are required in all of the sectors, but the fossil fuel sector is the sector where we have the greatest amount of technological opportunities to really substantially transform the sector and reduce anthropogenic methane emissions at levels that can really achieve that can achieve our targets, but are also really quite cost effective. Because in this instance, in much of the fossil fuel sector, methane is a source of income since it is a component of natural gas, and so anything that is not released into the atmosphere can, in many instances, be put into a market, which can. Where it can be sold and offset the cost of that mitigation. This is not this kind of mitigation is not a replacement for rapid decarbonization and a transformation of our energy sectors to low or zero carbon energy systems, but it similarly rapid decarbonization cannot replace action in the immediate term on reducing methane emissions. Those are things that have to happen at the same time, and there is no trade-off between them. So I really encourage everyone to keep a laser focus on this sector when looking for greater methane ambition in the next NDC. Next slide. I know I've gone a little bit over time, so maybe instead of going through this slide, because these are the steps that we enumerate in the guidance and will be available to all of you when we publish the guidance next week. Why don't we jump ahead and we get directly to the expert presentations, because those are the people you guys really want to hear from, I'm sure. So why don't I hand it over to Mr. James Diamond to give a presentation on Canada's experience. Mr. Diamond, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Nathan, and thanks to the CCAC and UN for putting this together. My name is James Diamond. I manage a small team here working on our domestic methane policy relating to oil and gas. Environment and Climate Change Canada is our federal Department of the Environment. Wide range of activities going on, but including risk management up into including regulation for greenhouse gas opportunities for reductions. My team leading particularly on oil and gas. So I've got a few slides together. So we typically can run through this kind of material in a day-long session, but we'll offer in 10 minutes what I think are a few key points that align with what has just been presented and relevance to our international commitments. Next slide. So we hold on to the outline first. Untitled, I'm sorry, but the Faster and Further Canada's Methane Strategy was published in 2022. And so it aligns with our NDC commitments to make specific reductions for methane. This structure points to specific policies for oil and gas, landfills and waste and agriculture, as was outlined earlier in terms of those global contributions. The alignment is similar in Canada, although oil and gas in particular is the largest emission source and has got the most advanced policy. As we move to the next slide now, really the centerpiece, I think, of the conversation today is to outline how significant activity has been in Canada, and each of these boxes represents presentations that we could explore in more detail. So I've labeled it a decade. I guess we're approaching a decade of action, but in 2025, we transformed, I think, some of the work that had been going on earlier in terms of Canada's climate policy to specifically look at methane emission reductions. At that point in time, a North American commitment was developed. So we worked closely with the United States and Mexico, focused on oil and gas emission reduction potential, and developed a collective policy to move toward a 40 to 45% reduction in methane emissions from that sector. In 2016 to 2018, that work was toward developing our first federal regulations. So we went through a robust regulatory process, engaging industry and other stakeholders and government partners in a enforceable regulation to set up an emission reduction pathway toward a 2025 objective. I want to point to the 2020 box only to say that, and I think most of what I'll talk about today is, the challenges and complications that we have as we drive toward these policy objectives that are very important right now. The multilateral jurisdictional elements of environmental protection in Canada are important. Within our federal construct for methane emission reductions, we are working most closely with three subnational provincial jurisdictions, British Columbia, Alberta, and Saskatchewan, all of whom develop their own unique approaches to reducing emissions in those jurisdictions, and effectively remove the application of our federal rules where those are working under an equivalency agreement. With the Global Methane Pledge, the aforementioned Faster and Further strategy was developed in Canada. That was published in 2022, initiating a review of Canada's methane regulations and setting a new policy objective in front of us for a 2030 reduction now of 75% emission reductions. And as the 2022-2023 elements that are described there point essentially to the communications that are managed domestically for us to move forward with this policy. At the end of 2023, we did publish proposals for amending regulations, and I'll use one slide to talk about the content of that. But before I go there, I wanted to emphasize, I think, some of what Nathan mentioned in terms of the transparency of the data, but also the challenge in developing these policies. These are four systems or publications that are relevant in Canada that would all be available for you to look at in various formats. So the history of emissions in Canada is documented in a national inventory report available through the UNFCCC. For methane emissions in particular, and for methane emissions in an oil and gas context, it's an ongoing challenge to understand those emissions, and we see regular reviews of the methodologies to estimate those emissions, including the history. So if you reach into Canada's current national inventory report, you would be able to see a detailed adaptation to the inventory history right now, trying to build our understanding of history and then future through the projections case for the sector based on accurate and new measurements that are happening under current conditions. For oil and gas in particular, the CR Energy Futures is our federal agency tasked with projecting oil and gas forecasts, and so emissions relating to production are an important part of understanding where you're going to be able to make reductions and to the extent that you're going to influence it. And then in Canada, this Petronex system is a production accounting system that is utilized in most jurisdictions, providing information on both production, but also on some of the emission data that's useful for us to track and understand the implications for our policy, the impact of our policy. Next slide. So in the 15-second version, as much as I said that we're reviewing the emission history, so that the scale of emissions would change year to year, but the trajectory is the important part. So one, the reduction of methane emissions has been an objective from an industry perspective, and if it wasn't labeled from a greenhouse gas perspective, it was certainly important from a gas conservation perspective. So we've seen a downward trend in Canada for almost 2 decades now. The policy objective, though, that we set for 2025, really we see the timelines from about, I'll say 2018 publication. Everything didn't start happening from a regulatory perspective, but it certainly influenced decision making at that time, and we are projecting ourselves to meet the 40% reduction by 2025. The blue line is the business as usual case that we make reference to compare our current amendment process and set up that 75 target. So while the discrete numbers may change from analysis to analysis, this trend line is something that we've seen repeated in all of our work in Canada. And next slide. So not to run through any significant details here, but I did want to at least pull up one slide talking about the regulatory approach and what it means. The application of these rules are very widespread in Canada. There are multiple policies in play, but these regulations will have application generally to onshore oil and gas production in Canada. And there are 2 primary elements to the regulations. So I mean, maybe in reverse order to what you read in the requirements on the bottom left-hand side of this. One is to drive venting towards zero. Is there no practical reason for any routine venting to be happening? So the elements that fit around that are requirements either for destruction, and what it means when you stop venting gas is that you're either conserving it and pulling it into a system to move that gas to a useful purpose, either for fuel on site or moving it into a sales line. But infrastructure requirements important there. Or in some cases, there's still hydrocarbon gas destruction, flaring, or incineration happening, and trying to dictate within the regulations that is happening efficiently. And then the second major element of the program is a fugitive emission detection program, where we try to structure an inspection program such that the industry understands when there's disruptions, unintended consequences, and therefore leaks or other operating problems that are resulting in emissions. Lastly, I would point to a secondary approach that is described in the regulations, characterized as performance-based, where industry could, instead of following the prescriptive regulations, set up a system on site where they've got continuous monitoring and are constantly reacting to emissions as they're identified. And I think that'll close now. Offering in the next slide just some contact information if you want to reach me, you can reach me personally if you're connected through the site, or Methane, a generic Methane inbox reaches my team so that we can talk further if there's anything about Canada's process here. Thanks very much. I'll close now.
Thank you very much. And we'll have an opportunity for Q&A at the conclusion of this next presentation, but thank you for that presentation. So without further ado, let me welcome Mr. Balabapa to speak about Nigeria's experience.
Thank you, Nathan. Hello, everyone. I am Bala Bappa. I coordinate CCAC activities in Nigeria, working with the ministries, departments, and agencies, and non-governmental organizations, and all other stakeholders to increase action to reduce SLCPs in Nigeria and also achieve the CCAC 2030 strategy. So without wasting much time, just as Diamond said, there is a lot to talk about, but within the 10 minutes, we'll try to highlight what needs to be said about what is going on in Nigeria. Just for an update as regards the development of our methane roadmap action plan, we have it's ongoing and it's in progress. We have addressed the 5 blocks and are now on the stage of stakeholder consultations to address the 5 blocks of the M-RAP, which is the quantification analysis targets, implementation pathways, and MRV. Just as Nathan mentioned, some of them, although all, but some of them are very relevant to the NDC revision and also the PTR activity currently going on, which CCAC is participating actively. So having said that, let me go through the highlights of my presentation, which will include an introduction, then the sources of methane and the methane emission targets, then implementation priority measures to reduce methane emissions, then actions being taken to achieve the 60% methane reduction targets of the revised NDC, then expected impact from the implementation of these strategies, and then the experiences, benefits, and concrete actions of addressing the oil and gas sector methane emissions in the NDC. And then I will proceed to conclude with an overview of the Nigeria's GMP champion and the establishment of the mitigation technical working group. So by way of introduction, Nigeria revised its NDC commitments to reduce emissions by 20% unconditionally and 47% conditionally. So the NDC priority sectors include energy, Apollo, IPPU, and West. So Nigeria, as you are aware, has developed a national action plan, which has been approved and is currently under implementation. And within the approved mitigation measures, we have 22 of them that cut across several sectors, including oil and gas, agriculture, transport, household energy, industry, waste, and HFC. And these mitigation measures were mainstreamed into the national development process and are included in our revised NDC. So the Nigerian main sources of methane are mainly from oil and gas, agriculture, and waste, but mainly from oil and gas because Nigeria is an oil and gas rich country, and there are a lot of activities going on in that sector, and the emissions of methane is very high. So it accounts for about 60%, while the one in agriculture is about 25% and waste 9%. So the emission targets, although we are trying to reduce gas flaring by 100% by 2030, but our targets for methane reduction is about 50 to 60% fugitive methane emissions reductions by 2031, which is also included in our NDC. So the implementation of the priority measures to reduce methane emissions will include, first of all, by being a signatory to the Paris Agreement, we have included, substantially commitments to reduce methane, and this include a reduction of methane by 60% by 2031 in our revised NDC, and we are also, members of the global, initiatives to reduce methane, which include the GMI, Global Methane Initiative, and the GMA, Global Methane Alliance. which has a target of reducing methane by about 60 to 75% by 2030. And I mentioned earlier, our NDC commitment is about 60% by 2031. So we'll be able to meet these targets. And of recent, we are also, signatories to the Global Methane Pledge, which has a target to reduce the emission by 30% by 2030, which is comfortable within our, NDC commitments, and we hope to achieve that. And the CCAC has been very, very supportive of all these activities. And of recent, as regards to reduction of the methane emissions in Nigeria in the oil and gas sector, CCAC supported us through a consultant clean air task force to build capacity and also develop, methane reduction guidelines, and is currently also supporting Nigeria to implement these guidelines together with the essentially, supporting the regulators, but working with the operators and the service providers to reduce methane emission in the oil and gas sector. So as regards the general NDC implementation, we developed a framework, and it's currently launched and is currently under implementation to address, achievement of the NDC across several sectors, several priority sectors of the country, which include power generation, follow, industry, transportation, buildings, oil and gas, and waste management, which are our priorities in the NDC. And this framework is currently being implemented. So as regards to actions to be taken to achieve the 60% methane reduction target of our revised NDC, we are vigorously, deploying leak detection and repair programs to achieve, as one of the strategies to achieve this reduction. And it will include estimation of leaks quantified from the oil and gas facilities based on the ELDA program, which means we set a baseline and then, deploy these activities and then see, evaluate and analyze the achievements. Then we have also the benchmarking trend of the daily logs of the fugitive emissions submitted to the NUPRC by the operators. The operators are by responsibility are supposed to submit these fugitive methane emissions to the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, which will be estimated, evaluated on annual basis. Then this will be a basis for comparing methane emissions as reported annually with the records from the previous year to see what has been achieved. Then we also intend to deploy use of cameras, drones, and other technological devices to observe the number of leaks compared to the earlier reported period. But that this is an activity in progress, but this is also a strategy that we are going to deploy, or some of them are being currently deployed to reduce emissions. Then we also ensure timely bailout of gas infrastructure to direct associated gas resources for domestic use. The country has a policy of national gas commercialization process, where the gas that was normally flared will now be harnessed for use and for domestic use to improve our energy supply to the country. So this is also a strategy that we are using to reduce emissions, but also to benefit from harnessing the otherwise flared gas for domestic use. Then we also have a strategy in place to assess whether the relevant equipment that have been replaced after the detection of the leaks are fully working, and also whether they have been working since the last monitoring of the inspection, and also the assessment of whether the leak functions have been done appropriately. Then from all these activities, then there is an expected impact of the implementation and we expect significant, reduction in methane emissions, and also hope to achieve our NDC targets by deploying these strategies to reduce methane emissions. Then by doing so, we'll enhance the reputation of the country and international cooperation. Just as Nathan said, these activities has a way of attracting international cooperation and even funding and support. So we also, by this, aim to achieve legal and regulatory compliance. And then, as I mentioned earlier, by the National Gas Commercialization Program, we will achieve reduction in energy poverty of the country by deploying the gas that would have otherwise been flared for use in the country. So my next slide, please. The experience, benefits, and concrete actions of addressing oil and gas sector methane emissions in the NDC. As I mentioned earlier, the CCAC is fully supportive, and through the consultant Clean Air Task Force, supported the development and currently supporting the implementation of the approved methane emission reduction guidelines, which is bringing together the regulators, operators, and service providers, and all stakeholders, so as to implement these methane guidelines towards achieving reduction in methane emissions in the oil and gas sector. Then there is, as Nathan mentioned, there is an ongoing program on the BTR across countries, and also which is supposed to be submitted at Azerbaijan, at the COP30 at Azerbaijan, and also the BTR2 and the national communications for Nigeria is the fourth national communication, which is continuous after the submission of the BTR1, and CCAC is participating actively, and that's why the guidelines that is going to be launched next week will be of importance to us, because as the meetings are going on, CCAC is participating actively. Then another activity that is of importance to Nigeria is the EU delegation. UNEP supported Nigeria's collaboration with the UNEP on the methane alert and response system, MAP, which is the International Methane Emission Observatory Program. And they have already contacted Nigeria, and we are working to implement the support in that direction. And we have mapped out the key stakeholders that are going to participate in the activity, and that very soon the program will take off. Then as regards the implementation of the NDC generally, the country is fully committed and is supported by the NDC partnership and international development partners, including CCAC, World Bank, UNEP, USAID, US Department of State, EU delegation, European cooperation, and so on. All of them are making their contributions in their various ways to help us achieve the objective, and we appreciate that. And then the CCAC also supported the collaboration, and as the Secretariat of the GMP, we have been supported. And just to mention that because of Nigeria's activities and achievements in the oil and gas sector and methane reduction strategies generally, Nigeria's National Director General of the National Council on Climate Change was appointed the GMP champion for Nigeria. And he has mobilized all stakeholders and set up the methane technical working group, which consists of participants from all relevant sectors in the private sector and public sectors. The initiative takes a whole society approach to galvanize robust public-private response and calls for action to achieve national and international methane reduction targets. So the technical working group demonstrates Nigeria's commitment to global methane pledge in the following ways. One, it provides support to government policy and project initiatives to reduce methane emissions. It also accelerates implementation of the global methane pledge by strengthening domestic methane mitigation efforts through concerted on-ground interventions, and also play a leading role in the regional methane mitigation efforts as appropriate. Then the group meets once in every quarter, but it can be summoned depending on the need for the discussions that are currently on the front burner. So that is all for Nigeria's, summary of what you have been doing. So thank you. Over to you, Nathan.
Thank you so much, Bala. That was fantastic. Both Nigeria and Canada are doing so much in this space. We really are examples of good practice that I hope that we can all profit from. So now we have just under 10 minutes for questions and answers to our experts. We're going to give everybody the opportunity now to be able to turn on your microphones. I ask, if you do wish to ask a question, please use the hand-raising function, which is at the top of your screen, and I will call on you. While we're waiting for hands to get raised, Jarir, could you jump to the next slide very quickly, and I'll get the all other business out of the way. So this is a workshop series. We have 2 additional workshops planned. I just want to flag for all of you, next week we're going to have a workshop on natural gas MRV, and the following week on the 13th of June we will have our concluding sectoral workshop focused on the waste sector, and I do hope very much that that we will see all of you there. If you have any waste focused experts that you think would profit from this this workshop and these resources, please do forward them this information, and there's a QR code here that'll take you to the registration page. Sorry, Jarir, have we allowed everybody to, have we given everybody access to the hand raising function? All right, we're still waiting for questions. I will. Oh, there's one question in the Q&A. Sorry, thank you for flagging that. Forgot we set that up. So this is for Bala. So at a recent UN conference at COP25, so not too recent conference, but there were discussions emphasized by Nigeria to recognition of the need for an ITMO registry.
Yeah, Nigeria is participating actively in the IMEO activities. And that's why I was saying that there is a program that is going to be implemented very soon in Nigeria. So as regards the COP event, actually Nigeria participated in the COP event in, was it Dubai? Yeah.
Thank you. So one final thought from us here in the GMP Secretariat. One of our roles providing Secretariat services for the Global Methane Pledge is to keep an accurate and up-to-date level of understanding of the actions that are taking place around the world to address methane consistent with the GMP Pledge. There is no commitment within the GMP to provide to do additional reporting beyond what countries have already agreed to in the UNFCCC commitments. I don't think anybody wants an additional reporting requirement, and for that reason, we are really relying on all of you, country representatives, to make sure that you are communicating your actions and levels of ambition, particularly on methane, in your BTRs this year, and then in your NDC 3.0 next year, because we don't want to put an additional burden on you that's already quite burdensome, but we are looking to those to really track progress in the GMP. That having been said, we are in the business of elevating good practice examples and really acclaiming the success of the broader partnership. So if you are making progress, you have new regulations or commitments that you wish for the GMP more broadly to be aware of, or you wish for us to elevate through our communications, please do not hesitate to reach out to myself or Sophie Bernard, we are the coordinators of the M-RAP program, and we will be very happy to accept that information. I will also say that next year marks the halfway point in the decade to the 2030 target of the Global Methane Pledge, and we will be developing a progress report next year that will hopefully show really quite significant national progress, so progress on the ground, but also projecting forward where we expect to be based on the levels of ambition in the NDCs that will have been published at that point, and whether or not that will be sufficient to hit the GMP pledge. And to do that kind of analysis, we are going to need to have a really clear understanding of what's happening on the ground. So it is really quite critical that all of you are helping us understand what you are doing, so that we can elevate that work and showcase it, but also so that we can show real progress going forward, because I think we all agree we need some good news in the climate space this year and next. And I think that I fully expect that methane is going to be one of those good news stories, at least in terms of levels of ambition and progress on the ground. So I see no hands raised. Oh, wait, I've raised my hand. Sorry. One hand raised. So Giselle. Are you able to unmute? You should be able to speak. Are you having? I apologize if you're having some technical difficulties. If there are questions that come up, if you think of things after we close the call, please do reach out. Our contact information is right here, and we will direct your questions to the appropriate experts. We have a deep roster of experts that go beyond just James and Bala. Of course, they are some of our real champions, but we will be happy to facilitate answers to those questions. So without further ado, thank you all. Have a good morning, afternoon, or evening. I apologize for Giselle, for the technical difficulty. If you could send us a written question, I'll make sure that your question gets answered. Sorry you weren't able to ask it here during this call. But with that, I will close the session, and I hope to see you at the next M-RAP workshop next week on natural gas MRV.
Bye-bye.
Well.